Hello again, everybody. This is James Bartley, and you're listening to the Cosmic Switchboard Show. My guest this week is old friend John Franklin. John has been a guest with us in a recent past, talking about his views on the geopolitical scene, as well as a deep dive into life as a Milab, operating in alternate realities, and also being bedeviled at times by these irksome, troublesome orbs that are more than just orbs, but you'll have to tune into that podcast and know what I'm talking about. So I thought I'd bring John back on board because, like myself, John has a deep and abiding interest in current affairs, military history, what have you. And he spent a lot of time abroad, particularly in the Far East and in South Asia. I thought I'd have his views on what's going on geopolitically and as far as the military operations worldwide. We have a lot of ground to cover. At the outset, I want to apologize for my voice. I've been dealing with a bug I've been trying to fight off all this time. So that explains kind of my croaking in this. So please bear with me. So any further ado, John Franklin, welcome back to the Cosmic Switchboard Show.
Thank you, James. Like I opened up with the last time, it's a super deep honor for you to have me as a guest, considering me as someone who should be interviewed, because as I talked about the last time very quickly, people take the time to go through and click through and listen to the encyclopedia of information that you've accumulated from these other guests that you've had on. I don't find it comparable to any other show. And having
Appreciate
had
that.
my own experiences in my life, when I am sitting, I usually download your show and I'll put it on my phone. And when I'm going from point A to point B in my car, or if I'm going 45 minutes or an hour, I'll play it. And so there I am driving down the freeway in the car, and I got your show on. And if there was a secret camera inside my car, you would see how many times that I would either, like what I say, laugh to myself or nod very hard, like because one of your guests says something, and I don't know it to be like, that guy may be saying. I can only say that I've gone through the exact same experience as that person. I mean, it is so uncanny that the people that you bring on and the way that it's like whoever you're attracting on your show is like they're truth tellers, and very infrequently do I find any of them like full of shit, James. So for those individuals who are tuned in and have the time to hear what we have to say, you're hearing as close as you can get to the truth.
Well, I appreciate that. A recent guest I've had, Tyler Koala. I mean, he was an excellent guest, and he really got a lot of high praise from a lot of my MyLab friends. A lot of them were contacting me saying, "Oh, I went through similar things as Tyler." And I had to bite my tongue a lot of times when I was interviewing Tyler because so many of the things that he mentioned, I have some personal familiarity with. Thank you for that. We make a point here of trying to bring these really cool guests. And just in the MyLab vein for a moment, I encourage people to plug into some of the older interviews with Logan, who's had a lot of alternate reality experiences, and also Delta. She's had likewise a lot. So I'm going to bring some of these people together. In the recent past, I had an all-male MyLab alternate reality panel, and I'm thinking it's in the formative stages. I'm thinking of having either a mixed male-female panel of MyLabs with alternate experiences, reality experiences rather, or an all-female MyLab panel discussing alternate reality type experiences. So I'm looking forward to that. What's been going on in the recent past, John? I'd like your thoughts on the India Pakistan conflict. You spent time in that corner of the world and other parts of Asia. Larry Johnson, retired CIA analyst, has brooded about the possibility, and I think there may be some merit to this. What triggered this latest round between India and Pakistan, the gunning down of something like 26 Indian tourists, may have been a CIA sponsored false flag, is within the realm of possibility because for so long, these militant groups were the Americans, the CIA and other agencies would funnel a lot of money to the Pakistani ISI, Pakistani military, and they in turn would turn around and fund using that money given to them instead of buying tractors or whatever. They turn around and they finance a number of militant Islamic groups. And one of these apparently had killed all those people, and that triggered this latest round, almost a tit for tat kind of attack, counterattack. Supposedly there's been a ceasefire, and supposedly there's already been some hostilities at some level resumed between the two nations. I'd like your thoughts about that, because this could quickly degenerate and spiral downwards into not just a regional nuclear conflict, but a global nuclear conflict. Problem being is that the Pakis, they get a lot of their military equipment from the Chinese. The Indians obtain a lot of their military equipment from France, from Dassault Industries. You and I talked about the malign influence the French have had throughout Africa and the Middle East. And here we have once again a scenario where Dassault Industries, essentially a state within a state, which has been involved in lots of covert operations in Africa, North Africa, and Sub-Saharan Africa, etc. What are your thoughts about this latest go-around between the Pakis and the Indians, going back to also the times when you were there, when they've had conflicts in the past? So the floor is yours, John.
I just wanted to say that I arrived in northern India in Gangtok, which is the capital of the province that's spelled Sikkim, Sikkim. And Sikkim, along with Bhutan, used to be autonomous countries. And because of the corridor that connects to China, India was always concerned that China could come in and grab it. So India went in there, and you could put air quotations and say they cut a deal with the Sikkimese government to allow Indian troops into the country. I mean, what does that sound like, James? It's one step away from having a military takeover, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so there's heavy artillery up there, and they call it the LOC, the line of control, okay, which is the DMZ that exists between both China and India and Pakistan and India. Okay, and they say it's the most heavily defended, tense border in the world, and we just saw proof of that. What a flare point that it was. So I was there in 2019. Now, I want to say that it was in February of 2019. I'm not going to start looking on my computer. But what occurred when I was there was in the same around in the Kashmir area. I don't know if you recall this or not, but a lone suicide bomber in a car bomb caught a 46 Indian soldiers, which at the time they were called paramilitary. Now, I don't know how do you not call them Indian soldiers yet call them paramilitary? They were in Indian military uniforms with Indian weapons on them, yet when the attack occurred, they were referred to as Indian paramilitary. So the car bomber drove it into the bus, igniting the car bomb, and all 46 soldiers died. This was worldwide news. You can search this out on the internet. It occurred. It was a Pakistani terrorist. Out of that, is it James? Is it GEM or JEM? You know what I'm referring to?
Yes.
Right. It was the JEM. I don't know everything. If I'm going to come off and I'm going to say, oh, they claimed responsibility. In my mind, I don't remember if that's true, but I'll just put it this way. Pakistan was blamed for it. Okay. Well, 46 of these soldiers got vaporized. You can look at, there was nothing left of that bus except small pieces. Whoever made that car bomb did a great job. They did a perfect job. Well, there was ensuing artillery fire, and the border got hot, and then the Indian Air Force launched and lost a MiG-21.
They got shot down or
shot down, and the pilot got captured. And to make a long story short, he was returned. Like when he got exchanged at the border, I'm not sure if he was in his flight suit or not, but what I do remember of him, because we're both men, and you could tell if someone's not shaved and showered in 3 days, right? Or 4 days. They look disheveled. When he walked across that border, he looked like he was manicured. Okay, so I was pretty impressed by that. Now, I don't know if he was tortured or he got his ass beat. I know it's not funny, but when they presented him back over to the Indian border, he looked like he was, and very, very well cared for. So the point that I'm gonna make is like if you kind of think about it and compare and contrast the two events, they're almost identical.
It's
Right?
triggered by some kind of terrorist event attributed to a terrorist group that had possibly Pakistani ISI military intelligence backing, which they've been doing that all along. So there
Right.
is some degree of plausibility to it.
Well, I'm just saying, but on the fascia, if you were just opening up a newspaper and your Joe Sixpack, both of those things are like identical. Pakistan terrorist attacks India, people die. Indian Air Force launches planes, and then now a MiG 21. I mean, that's a Cold War relic. However, I mean, the North Vietnamese, when they were using those against F4 and A4s in the Vietnam War, they did okay with those.
Yeah, to the point where the Navy had to initiate their Top Gun school because they were only winning two out of every three engagements, which was the attrition rate was too high.
Right, and in Korea it was 8-1 in the Korean War.
Yes.
So it's a huge, and we don't know how many Hungarian, Czech, or Russian pilots were actually flying those planes in Vietnam.
Yeah, and that's another problem that we have because like the Taiwanese pilots, for example, some of them flew U-2s. Some of them were definitely passed by the CIA and cutouts. The Chinese aircraft manufacturing company Camco was a front for that, providing the national Chinese with warplanes and also the training for their pilots. So that's one of the things that we have to try to figure out. And also, if you look at it from the standpoint of cui bono, who benefits from this? Because if you zoom
Yeah.
out and you say, okay, if the possibility exists, this was a false flag inspired at some level by the CIA, Mossad, or someone else, what would be the purpose of it besides getting these two nations to engage in conflict once again? Is it somehow to undermine China, weaken them in another theater of operations, thereby, in theory, taking pressure off of other places? What are your thoughts on that?
Look at this now, James, under this date that we're talking, and there is a ceasefire going on, right? There's no more conflict in India and Pakistan,
Yes.
right? Okay, but there was at that one point. So is your statement saying that whoever initiated that wanted to possibly use that as a catalyst so a bunch of dominoes would fall and there would be a conflict in China's backyard?
Yeah, just something that would keep them otherwise engaged. For example, the Chinese have had issues with the Indians because of some of the borders and some of the mineral rights and other things, despite the fact they're part of the BRICS initiative. China
Right.
and India have had issues.
That whole Himalayan range between them has always been disputed of where it starts and stops for each country. And the Belt and Road, China goes in there and starts building. They even say in satellite photographs that China has quote unquote village cities inside of Bhutan now. They've crossed the Bhutan. Bhutan's not strong enough to kick them out. So, yes, China has been encroaching on India. There's absolutely no doubt about that.
Well, we'll see how this plays out. Thankfully, there's been a ceasefire, and nothing will ensue, and nothing will allow this thing to spiral downwards. I just hope it's one of those cyclic flare-ups. It's a permanent flashpoint because if you go back to partition, the British parting gift to the people of the subcontinent was drawing these lines in a map that absolutely ensured future ongoing conflict between the two
Right.
nations. That has to be taken into account because they operate the global controllers on the basis of the global strategy of tension. You have all these places that are eternal flashpoints. North and South Korea used to be
Yeah.
Northern Ireland and the United Kingdom, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes.
So then you look at Taiwan, China, et cetera. So yes,
Yes.
this could be another example of trying to reignite a regional flashpoint, and it looks like cooler heads have prevailed. So, yeah, I just wondered your thoughts on that.
I was very surprised at the expedience of the ceasefire. Were you?
Yeah, it happened quite suddenly, and the Americans got involved. And not too long ago, I would have rolled my eyes. Oh yeah, you want country that's permanently seems, especially under the Democrats, who are waging permanent war on the planet, and suddenly they want to be the peacemaker, right? It kind of made me roll my eyes, but I can't argue with the results, right? I mean, I take the good with the bad.
So once I heard, and then, one thing both of us, we like to keep up to speed on geopolitics and military movement, and we both follow and we both talk about it. Because you more than heard, James, that it was rumored that there could have been upwards to 125 jet aircraft engaged in a large battle.
Yeah, I mean, the folks' images of Battle of Britain era dogfights. I don't know if there were that many in the airspace.
Right.
We know that both sides have a fair amount, but how many they actually deployed, that's another question entirely.
Right. Now, what's funny about that is I've searched the internet high and low to try to get more than just some podcaster talking about it. I've tried to get more of an official sources talking about that particular unfoldment and what actually occurred, how many aircraft were in the air, and what really happened. And you can't really find anything, James. I mean, you can find, and it's just some gloss over information. They have either it didn't happen like they said they did. It may not have happened at all.
Well, if you look at the contrasting differences from one podcast to the next, those that have an anti-China bias, and who knows who they're fronting for or shilling for, or maybe they're just these brain dead flag wavers, but they're droning on about how inefficient the Chinese made air defense system was for the Pakistanis, right? And then
Okay.
if you look at the Pakistani claims, they're saying they shot down 5 fast jets, 3 Rafales, Dassault
Yes.
Industry, French built, and then a MiG 29 and also a Su-30, right?
Yes.
So now they have shown wreckage, but as of yet, they haven't shown a pilot, right? Because presumably,
Right.
we don't know if all the pilots and they had like a radar intercept operator or a weapons specialist on board, depending if it's like a 1 or 2 seat variant. We haven't heard hide nor hair of them, right? You would think that if they captured some of the air crew, they could make some political capital out of it, maybe demand a hostage trade or something, but we haven't had that. And the claims from both sides, for example, if taken at face value, the effectiveness of the Chinese export version of their J-10 fighter, and then also the air-to-air missile that they've been firing, if taken at face value, it was quite effective against the Indian
Do you
jets.
know that they're claiming that J-10 is based off the airframe of the F-6?
It wouldn't surprise me. The Chinese are very good at knockoffs, and by this point, they're making next generation fighters that put to shame anything built. I mean, what's the
Right.
next generation fighter of the West? The F-35. What a joke that is. And then there's the notion of the Indian Air Force fired off at a distance, targeting military. Yes. So in theory, you would think that they would have fired. Didn't need to cross into Pakistani airspace to launch their munitions, but still the air defense missiles of the Pakis were able to hit the Indian jets while still in Indian airspace. So
I think also I read, James, that they have the 300
yes,
Pakistan. And that is like, I
yeah,
know they're up to the S-400 right now, but that S-300 is completely badass.
yeah. I think it is. I think it's a Chinese variant of that.
Okay,
Yeah, I think
right,
it's a
right,
Chinese variant.
right,
It's just a question like how effective is this for the Chinese? Of course, it's just in their vested interest to give the impression that their weapons are superior. And there's something that people have to understand. There's always an export version of, say, in our
right,
example, a fighter aircraft. When
right.
doing all these mega arms deals with fighter aircraft, you, the seller, are going to sell, to use a term in the auto industry, a base model. You're not going to provide all the extras, the advanced avionics,
Yes.
weapons, targeting, because one fine day that plane could be turned against you, or So that's why this J-10 is an export version. And for many years, the American Northrop, for example, they were selling an export version of the F-5, if you remember. I mean, even when Iranians were calling America the Great Satan, they still kind of deal with these F-5s to the Iranians,
I
right?
think they call that the Tiger Shark.
Yeah, you're right. So that's just an example that they're not going to export the best possible version to cut to the chase. They're going to sell them an export version that's not as advanced as their own Air Force's versions, but the Pakis, in our example, have the technicians and the means to do so. They can add whatever they can, and hopefully it doesn't degrade the performance of the plane. So I could see this as a boon if taken at face value. There's going to be some degree of propaganda, of course, because every arms manufacturer wants to laud the performance of their own wares and denigrate the performance of others. So a lot of people have been very critical of the Rafale, the Dassault Industries French fighter. A lot of people are talking about, well, this means that the J-10 is a far superior plane. Maybe, maybe not. We have to zoom out and we'll see. Hopefully, like we said earlier, this whole thing dies down. Now let's shift gears also to the
Sure.
to the Yemenis. If you're looking at this strictly from a
Can
neutral,
I throw one thing out there about the Indian Air Force
yeah,
and
yeah,
the
please go
Dassault?
ahead.
They paid $245 million for each one of those, James.
I
Four
know.
of them cost $1 billion.
Yeah, there's a one seater and a two seater variety, and
I mean,
that's a lot of.
they paid a lot of money, and it is just a complete. Even if they lost one or two of them on paper, it's a complete embarrassment
You're talking
for the
about
West.
you're talking about like $500 million just in the loss of two planes. I mean,
Correct.
you talk about prohibitively expensive. You would have thought that whoever the arms dealer was for Dassault, I mean, that guy deserves a pat in the back because he.
And the Chinese engineers have to be doing high fives and jumping all around and celebrating and popping champagne.
Oh, I'm telling you, because their stock is going to go up. Dassault is going to go down.
Right.
And getting back to the Yemenis,
Okay.
Trump says, that the Yemenis don't want to fight anymore. We've come out on top, yada, yada, yada. Just last week, they lost another, or 2 weeks ago, they lost another FA-18. Before that, they lost one. The carrier
One
Harriet.
that's the
It is. Apparently, it was on the elevator. It was being either moved up to the flight deck or something. And then the carrier had to take evasive maneuvers, and the jet, like 60, 70 million, fell overboard, right? So that's
Jesus.
three they've lost. The Harry S. Truman has lost. The first was lost to a friendly fire. The USS Gettysburg shot down and I still haven't got the full details whether it was the electronic warfare variant of the FA-18, and then the two after that were lost just due to negligence or like what they would call in peaceful times a mishap, an air accident, right, or a mishap.
Right.
So, and then because of the problems that the U.S. Navy is having, the Harry S. Truman is at the retreat further up the Red Sea to get away from all this, right? So, and then they decide to call a ceasefire. It ties in with what, and we can get into this in the second half, if we start delving into more sensitive issues. But so the Israelis were not happy that the Americans, the Navy, stopped their operations against the Yemenis because not only was it ineffective, the the Navy resorted to the tried and true tactic. Well, you can't find the actual military or military targets, so let's just attack infrastructure like they've done in Yugoslavia and Iraq and
Right.
everywhere else. They'll just
Right.
hammer in hospitals and anywhere
Yeah, just like the
people are
economic
gathered.
punishment. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just collective punishment, right? And then call them military successes. Well, the Navy has pulled back. There's a ceasefire with Yemen. We know from the past that anything that gives the appearance of putting the Israelis, the Zionists, and the Israeli lobby in a bad light, they don't like that. So for
Right.
Trump to be doing what he's doing now, is it just a reflection of this super Gemini mentality where he just is going to say, I'm tired of Netanyahu trying to tell me what to do. I'm going to do it my way. I'll pull the Navy out of the Red Sea, et cetera, et cetera. And we'll look for a more peaceful, equitable solution in the Middle East, which does not require going to war with Iran, right? Iran was the
Right.
last country that was on Wes Clark's list of destruction. That's what they've been trying to do all this time. So, what are your thoughts about all that? The Navy's pullout against the Yemenis, which not only was it ineffective, but the Yemenis were shooting down drones. They'd already resulted in the loss of 3 fast jet aircraft. It's a humiliation for the U.S. Navy. There's no other way to look at it. So, what are your thoughts on that, John?
Okay, and so why don't we turn the clock back more than a couple of years and just kind of review what happened when the mighty kingdom of Saudi Arabia tried to go head to head with the Yemenis.
Yes,
What
very
what
good.
what ended up happening there, James?
They didn't dislodge the Yemenis. They're still there. The Yemenis are a unified country. So forget about sending in a Green Beret ODA team in there to raise resistance. It's not going to happen. So that whole
Right,
concept is out the window. It's the
right.
Saudis and also some of these United Arab Emirates, the Gulf countries there. And isn't it interesting how the U.S. always tends to be aligned with these harsh Sunni Wahhabist kind of nations, including Saudi Arabia? Supposedly, Saudi Arabia and Iran are in talks now. They've been mortal enemies for a long time. That's another thing that can't make the Israelis happy. So, yeah, there's a lot of moving parts to this, John. But yes, getting back to your point, the Saudis had been waging war using proxies and cutouts in a long-standing war against Yemen too. So that's been going on.
And they were armed to the teeth with top state-of-the-art weaponry and went against the Yemenis and bombed the shit out of them, just like the U.S. did to North Vietnam.
And it hasn't had any effect.
And it didn't have any effect. If you look at it, what was the outcome of that? I would say it was a complete embarrassment to the House of Saud.
Yes. And so they had to have like a face-saving gesture to get back on more of a peaceful footing because clearly if the U.S. Navy can't deal with the Yemenis, certainly the Saudis won't be able to either. I mean, they can expend aircraft, bombing raids, what have you, but they're going to lose some aircraft as a result into no effective gain because at some level you would think that the Saudis, have to be to some degree in sympathy with what the Yemenis are doing in the recent past. There's going to be some kind of internal conflict going on. I think the best thing they could do for themselves is to wind down their covert operations and their support for the destabilization of Yemen, because I don't see that happening. I don't see the Yemenis crumbling. If they can't deal with Yemen, Saudi and the Americans, they're not going to be able to deal with Iran. So that's a
So
non-starter.
if I was some sort of specialist, attached out of the NSA or the NRO, and I had some war college guys around me, and then I'm just fantasizing, James, okay? Then I called in or flew in Saudi generals who were war planners against the Yemen war. And then I had whatever the plan of the attack to the United States. Well, look, carrier born. We were going to send carriers. So we're all sitting around the table and we're going to say, okay, we're going to open the meeting up. We got these Saudis here, and everyone knows that you guys were not successful. I know you tried real hard, but ultimately you couldn't crack this nut. Okay, tell us your experience about this. And they would go ahead and they would say, we tried this and we upped the game by doing this. And then they have this unmerciful blockade going on too. Or do you remember that?
Which one was that around? What time frame?
The Saudis blockaded Yemen and tried to starve them out.
Oh, yeah,
James,
yeah.
do you recall that?
Yeah.
So they said it's a humanitarian, you guys are killing women and children. They pushed it that far and still couldn't beat these guys. They did not tap out. They kept. Okay, so now here I'm in this meeting with the Saudis, and then we're going over it, and you're like, okay, you guys tried A, B, C, D, E. Did it? Nope, it didn't work. Okay, now we've got American equipment and lives that are on the line. Okay, you guys heard what the Saudis said. Now, okay, America, so you got the war college guys and you got the carrier-based operation. What are you guys going to do? And they're going to say, well, we're going to try asymmetrically to do this and drop a bomb and move this over here and use this and jam these guys and this. And then if you were really looking at it, how much different was the plan of attack going to be, James, when you boiled it down, that what the Saudis did versus what the Americans did? You can't put boots on the ground. You're not going to have a D-Day invasion of Yemen. This is all going to be airstrikes, just like you said, like Yugoslavia, like Iraq. It didn't work before. It's great data collection, right? It's excellent training for the pilots. It lets us flex. So everybody sees this big ass carrier and we're bombing and everything like that. Trump, was it like a peace deal? He did declare that we're not going to bomb you anymore.
Yes, he intimated that, well, the Yemenis, he called them the Houthis, which is actually a derogatory term. Ansar Allah
Right,
is the real name of their movement. He
right.
intimated that, oh,
Yes.
well, they want to quit because it's tired of, they're losing. No, they weren't losing. If I want to be generous about it, I can say it was indecisive, a strategic draw. But the fact that they got the American Navy to withdraw, essentially, that's a resounding victory. I mean,
Trump said we will not bomb you anymore. I'm paraphrasing. In the end, but it was much quicker because if I'm not mistaken, I believe that Saudi Yemenis conflict that lasted like 7 years, James.
Yemen has been the
It wasn't
site
a
for
couple of
so
months.
long, going back to the Cold War era of intrigues, because it's a strategic choke point. We were talking earlier about
Right.
permanent flashpoints, permanent choke points, and that is the mother of all choke points right there. And the
Right.
Yemenis happen to be there.
I mean, stepping a bit back and taking a look at it, I think Trump did the right thing. He did the correct thing by backing out, and we didn't lose any. I'm waiting for the day to get up in the morning and click on news, and there's a carrier that's about to sink. Like it's listed over 45 degrees and its nose is down, and there's black smoke billowing back in. All it's going to take is what are those Russians? Do they have Zircon and Sunfire? Those are like badass cruise missiles that are designed to take out ships. Are you familiar with
Yeah,
those?
they've got their caliber class Corvettes.
Or choose another one. Right, right. You only need a couple of those things to hit. If it's a, I don't call it a lucky shot, but if you get a good shot or a couple of them, the carrier is going to go down. And what an embarrassment that's going to be
It
for the
would
United
be,
States of
and
America.
that's not even including if they actually started attacking Iran, the U.S. That would mean that Iranians just start launching all these missiles at all these American bases throughout the Middle East, hammering
Right.
them. And look what they've done. I mean, just recently, the Yemenis dropped a missile on the Ben Gurion airport. It's just that
Yes.
Iron Dome missile defense system, just like the THAAD, they're all overrated. And so there's nothing they could do about that. So if they actually went to the stupid trouble of attacking Iran, the U.S., that means that the Iranians could then turn their submarines loose. Oh, yes, they have these old fashioned diesels and what have you. No, they're still effective. Some of the diesels
Right.
are quieter than the nuclear submarines. And all it takes
Right.
is one torpedo to sink aircraft carrier, the U.S. Harry Truman, and whatever is
Correct.
out there. And I would say that that would be the ultimate dream come true fantasy for these warmongers.
Absolutely.
U.S.
Oh,
aircraft carrier.
you mean to unleash hell?
Well, yeah, I mean, it would be the biggest boon to these warmongers if a U.S. aircraft carrier was destroyed.
The ultimate USS Maine.
It would be the USS Maine, it would be the Lusitania, it would be
Right. Yes.
Gulf of Tonkin,
Absolutely.
all that rolled into one.
Yeah, you got it. You're 100% correct, James.
So by pulling it out of the region, that safeguards it. Now, we don't know if there is any kind of pointing remote control access that one or more defense contractors have with these carriers. We know that they can sync up from a remote location with a combat information center as far as the inputs are concerned, what have you. Could they do something remotely to affect navigation or the nuclear reactors on board? We don't know. But I would be very mindful of who and what they let on as civilian defense contractors to work on this, that, or the other, because you don't know what they're going to do. We know that there was a buildup prior to the Twin Towers going down with all these technicians and mysterious people going to all these floors, hammers and tongs and heavy
Right.
equipment being
Yeah.
moved around. There's no telling what's happened to some of these capital ships, these aircraft carriers, before they even left the port. Uh,
James, I never even thought about that.
yeah,
Thank you for pointing that out to me. Geez, that is really enlightening. Absolutely, they would do it.
yeah, they would, because if you look at it from a cost benefit analysis, oh, they lose 6,000 plus sailors, but then they get another big juicy war. They either at that point could steamroller through a declaration of war or some kind of Tonkin Gulf like resolution. That's all they would
Yeah,
need.
they would mint coins and print out stamps of that.
There's warfare on many fronts. Oh, and for the end of this first segment, we talked in the past about this war against the cartels, and it's taken like a very sinister turn. We knew this stuff was going on, but on the Redacted show yesterday, I was watching an interview that the Redacted team had with a couple of guys on site in Tijuana, Mexico, my old stomping grounds. I lived in San Diego and the border town right there in San Ysidro, and every once in a while, me and friends would make forays into TJ and go to the nightclubs, what have you, or go further down Baja to Ensenada and places like that. The person who was being interviewed had just visited another suspected mass grave. There's been so many people that have disappeared, have been murdered. They have these memorials set up in a lot of these border towns, Tijuana being one of them, where the families, and this harkens back almost in a way to the Desaparecidos, and the people that were being interviewed by the Redacted team, they had visited a a mass gravesite, a suspected mass gravesite, and they talked about how this is going on a lot of these border towns on both sides of the border, where it's almost a replay in a way of the Desaparecidos, Argentina, Chile. Once the
Yeah,
U.S. installed these military juntas, suddenly all the trade unionists and the poets and everyone else started disappearing, right?
right.
But that's been going on in the cartel drug wars all this time because of the viciousness of these cartels. Some of them, the leadership of some of these cartels, they're outright Satanists, hardcore. And so you have all these pictures of all these disappeared people, many of them young women. And I know from my time in San Diego, you don't hear much about this, but there were problems with gringo girls, American girls who were, some of them were underage, couldn't drink legally in California. So they'd slip over for a night of clubbing in Tijuana, TJ, and then they'd go
Yeah,
missing. And there
right.
was some suspicions that the federales, the Mexican police, or other law enforcement slash military elements may have been involved at some level. The corruption down there is so part of the whole culture, and that's
Well,
why we
yeah, it's
talked about
crooked.
the fallacy of this drug war against the cartel. Because the cartels, because first they have to remove the malign influence of the CIA, Mossad, etc., which would in itself cause a civil war if they're serious about doing this. Secondly, there's a number of law enforcement entities and military, paramilitary groups in Mexico that are aligned with the cartels or factions of the cartels. There are fiefdoms and empires carved out in different parts of Mexico, and occasionally and ongoing, there have been these wars between the cartels. The CIA, just like how at one point the U.S. backed both Iraq and Iran in their long war, tilting to one side and then tilting to the other, supplying one, supplying the other. It seems to be going on in, well, this goes back to the Cali cartel wars with the Medellin cartels. The CIA had its hooks into both of those cartels, and they were warring against each other. Point being is that this war with the cartels will spill over into the CONUS, continental U.S. And these cartels, they're vicious, they're bloodthirsty, been supported by the Democrats in particular for so long. What are your thoughts about that? Because if we're having all this conflict on the border and spilling over in America, that represents a clear and present danger, far superseding imagined threat of Iran and all these other places, right? So how would they even begin to resolve something like that?
What limited like visual data that I'm getting, they make these music videos of sorts, and then they show like how powerful these cartels are, where they show their armored vehicles, their body armor, the weaponry, their training that they're doing. I mean, it seems like so far above anything like Al Qaeda or the Taliban ever had. It seems like these guys are decked out into state of the art everything. And then
Yeah.
I've read that they're actively recruiting with open check ex-Russian soldiers who had specialists in eavesdropping intel.
There are ex-Delta operators that are training and advising elements of the cartels right now.
And then I've heard that the Mexican army has confronted these guys, and they get outgunned. That the cartels outgunned the Mexican army. I know a woman, and she's from Colorado, and so she's doing a cooking show. So she flies around the world and tapes herself cooking with these other chefs. So she went on the Pacific side of Mexico, like down where Mexico City would be, but on the Pacific side. And she said it was absolutely beautiful down there and everything. And then I asked her, what about the cartels? And she said, well, I really didn't go out at night. And the way that she painted the picture, and she's intelligent, that like that area that she was in was owned or controlled by whatever the name of the cartel was. And she threw it out there. I cannot remember it. And basically, they keep the order in that area. There isn't like the police or judges. They are the ones that keep the order, and everyone accepts it. And when she was down there for a week, nobody harassed her. There wasn't any problems or anything, but she knew about the cartels and everything like that. And I guess that's just the way it is down there. If like you were traveling down there from point A to point B in a 100-mile road trip, are you going to encounter a roadblock? And there's going to be
Yeah,
cartel
the horror
guys there,
stories that I've heard of
and they're armed, and they tell you, get out of the car right now and give us your passport. What are you going to argue, James?
Yeah, there's been many cases of that, of entire buses being emptied out and people slain outright, murdered right on the spot, or taken away as hostages, or sold off, or taken away as a human chattel in human trafficking operations. And that just shows you how dark and demented. We know that it's a two-party duopoly, the Rhino Republicans and the Democrats, but the Democrats, for crying out loud, they're like the hardcore Bolshevik wing of this two-party duopoly. It seems like no evil is left undone, if that makes sense. They will plumb the depths of depravity. It was during the Otrama administration, Operation Fast and Furious, remember that, where the ATF was deliberately passing on millions and
Yes.
millions of dollars worth firepower of arms to the cartels, right?
And the
So that's a
serial
federal
numbers all
agency.
were evident.
Yeah.
You remember, yeah, what proof? Well, I'll tell you what proof there was, the serial numbers.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so they arm the cartels themselves, these mercenaries, if you want to call them that. Some of them probably definitely have links with the CIA. These ex Delta operators and ex Special Forces guys, they go in and they train them. So they're going to train them at least. We know that one of the basic functions of Army Special Forces and Delta is foreign internal defense. I mean, they're always sending teams, military training teams, to train the security palace guard of this emir in the Gulf states or that, right? So we know that that's what they've been doing for so long, and they make it contingent upon foreign aid. Okay, well, you give you this money, but you have to accept our counterinsurgency advisors. It's just part of the deal. Even though there is no insurgency, don't worry, we'll make an insurgency, right? So for a long time now, they've been sending out these counterinsurgency advisors all over Latin America, Asia, everywhere else to train up local security. So why wouldn't they do the same exact thing to these cartels? So these cartels, like you pointed out, they're trained to a higher elements within them are trained to a higher proficiency than even the Mexican military and Mexican law enforcement. That's just a recipe for disaster. It would really spark an internal civil war with all these spook agencies if they were really intent on stamping out the cartels. That is a major front war on many levels. These cartels are vicious. They go after family because of the connections they have with spook agencies. They will get, and I've talked about this in some of my recent podcasts and commentaries, they will be provided with intel. If they probably already have their own well-established intel networks, but they probably are also getting help from some of these deep state actors. Who to target? If there's like this troublemaking DEA person, think of Kiki Camarena, the DEA undercover guy who was set up and killed. They blamed it, on the cartels, if memory serves. But really, he was bumped off because he was pissing a lot of people off in the CIA and elements of the DEA. And they conveniently just blamed it on drug traffickers, right? So I can
Right.
see them doing something similar if these people in the military wake up and say, who are we really fighting? Because some of the very same military bases, these military forces that are going to fight the cartels, some of the very same bases they're going to stage out of are the exact same air bases and military installations where drugs are being brought into. Very few of them will even catch on to that level of treachery. But your thoughts?
Back and you think about all this going on and everything you just said over the last 5 minutes and how dark and twisted the world that we're living in is. It almost seems as like on some level there's like a negative entity invasion in Mexico. And I mean, maybe sure in the United States too, but to a level where these private armies, drug fueled, are given permission or they're at least okay. The United States could go in there and do something, but as you said, they're the ones that are fueling it.
Cartels are so
Thing.
entrenched with the military and law enforcement too. Whatever advanced intel that the Americans receive, they could already be thwarted and undermined by the elements of the military and law enforcement of Mexico working with the cartels, and also
Right.
the deep black spook agencies that want the cartels to do their job of destroying and undermining America.
This is a war or a skirmish, more than a skirmish, that could pop up on the Mexican border and cause all kinds of problems in the United States of America. It's like looming, it's right there. It's like a horse in the starting gate. All you should just open the gate up and anything could be possible. I'm very surprised that, but you've heard of these stories? Have you read these stories, James, about how these, like, I don't know where they're from. I don't know if they're Salvadorian or Panamanian. Okay, right. These gangs are like up in Colorado and they're like taking over entire apartment complexes.
Yeah,
Have you about
yeah,
this?
Tende Aragua. Supposedly,
Okay.
ICE and immigration has been going after those guys and clearing them out, much to the dismay of the liberals, of course.
But they still did it. They still pulled it off. And
Yeah.
then right, ICE and others have to go in there and clear these guys out. I don't think they're beating them as much as they're like breaking up that clique of people that are there. And if they're running prostitution, if they're running drug and other thing like that, I don't know how much of a dent that they're really truly putting into this.
True. Well, we reached the
Yeah.
end of a fascinating first segment. One other quick point about the cartel war is will Trump authorize the use of military aviation assets in Mexican airspace and over Mexico? Will they provide firepower support, close ground support to ground elements? I mean, that's a whole other issue. It's going to deal with issues of Mexican sovereignty, what have you. So anyhow, we've reached the end of a fascinating first segment with our guest, John Franklin. And if you like what we do, if you believe in what we do, please go to the cosmicswitchboard.com, sign up and become a member, and we'll see you at the top of the next segment.